Hey everyone, this is my Teach 261 Think Aloud. My lesson is about ending punctuation. And so I did this lesson with my Teach 267 class, which is an early childhood literacy course. So I kind of just took it and put it into these different categories for you so you could see what parts of the lesson we had, what materials we used, what the assessments were, and then what were the additional resources that I found. So our areas of instruction are first grade ELA concepts, focused more on reading foundation skills and writing. These standards are listed here. It's about recognizing sentences, parts of a sentence, and like the ending punctuation, and then being able to use ending punctuation correctly in sentences. And so my objectives were students being able to identify the different punctuation marks and being able to choose the correcting end punctuation mark to complete the sentence. The purpose of this lesson was to increase students' ability to use correct punctuation in writing as well as in reading. And then my materials were using a smartboard, using a smartboard activity, which I've listed under here, a PowerPoint, and then I included detective hats and magnifying glasses. Those are not required. We didn't end up using them, but my cooperating teacher was very engaging with her lessons. We did a math lesson one time about constructing base 10 pieces, and so we all had construction hats. So it was a very similar concept to be able to be detectives and find our punctuation. And then an anchor text, which is also mentioned in the materials, is The Punctuation Station by Brian Clearly. So the way that I would introduce this lesson would be talking about how we are going to be going on a detective journey to find the punctuation. And so the first material is a slideshow. I put PowerPoint or Google just because I know depending on what if you're like a Microsoft school versus a Google school. So ending punctuation. And then the same objective and learning targets. So I would preface this by saying, does anybody know what this punctuation mark is? Or even saying, does anybody know what this is? And then we would get some responses from the students about what it could be, as well as seeing what they have to say if they have any knowledge about what it is. So then we would move on and we would talk about that this is a period. How we use a period in grammar is at the end of a sentence when making a statement. And then some statements that I would have as examples would be, I have curly hair. I went to the park. Or you can also use a period in the middle of initials. These are my initials. And in abbreviations, such as AM and PM, like in time, Mr. and Mrs., like in mom and dads and whatnot, or any adults. And so then the sound cue that we would use, this is again something my CT used already, was sound cues. So for their punctuation, each punctuation mark had a corresponding sound cue. So for periods, it was an kind of like if you're driving and you stop too hard and your tires screech a little bit, that's what that was, just to kind of connect the meaning of the punctuation mark to its symbol for an easy way for students to remember. So the period is an Then again, we would do the same thing with the question mark. We would talk about how a question mark is used at the end of a sentence when asking a question, like, who is your teacher? What is your favorite food? When is your birthday? How are you? And so then the sound cue for the question mark is a So it kind of, again, goes along with the point of the punctuation symbol as well as what it is supposed to do. And then the same thing again with the exclamation point. And I would also touch on the difference between the fact that this is an exclamation point versus the other ones being marks. So we would talk about that we use an exclamation point at the end of a sentence when showing excitement or strong emotion, like, I got a dog. My grade is an A. I'm so excited. And so then the sound cue for this would be a woo. So just showing excitement. So for example, if we were to read this, we would say, I am so excited, woo, to represent the exclamation point. And so this is a check for understanding that I would use immediately after. I would point to the different symbols, asking what the symbol's name was and then what their corresponding sound cue was. So for this one, we would say question mark, and I would do this for the other ones, and this would also give me a gauge of if the students are grasping this concept right away. So then if not, I could just flip right back and go over whichever mark of punctuation they needed help with. And I've included this PowerPoint for you guys. So that is the first thing on the materials. So the next that we would do would be we would read The Punctuation Station by Brian Clearly. I was unable to find a video recording of it on YouTube, either himself reading it or someone else reading it. So basically this book takes different punctuation marks more than just the period, comma, and exclamation point like we were focusing on in this lesson, but it takes them and puts them into a train station. And so each page or section talks about the different punctuation marks in relation to the station, which is why it's called the punctuation station. So we would just focus on the parts of the book that talk about the period, the question mark, and the exclamation point, and we would use sound cues when we would read. And then our final activity is when we would start to get into the modeling, the guided practice, and the independent practice of this lesson. So this would require the smartboard activity that I had. Unfortunately, I was not able to upload this activity onto Padlet, but it basically is very similar to this worksheet that I found online. So it would have these different sentences, and then at the very bottom it would have different punctuation marks to choose from, and what you would do would be to drag the correct punctuation mark to the correct sentence. So that was part of our activity. So we would drag the mark, and first I would model this. So if the first sentence happened to be, the dog went for a walk. Then me as the teacher would model saying, I think we should use a period because the sentence is a statement. And so then for the guided practice, the students would go through and finish completing the remaining sentences. We would complete them as a class, but it would be more based on if an individual student wanted to come up and move the mark themselves, or if we had teams, then the student could work with their team, and their team could decide which mark it was, and then I could move it myself. So just depending on how the students would like to complete that activity for the remaining portions. And then the independent practice would be the students would use these immediately after in writing or reading. So if they chose to do writing time, they would have a chance to practice their different punctuation marks using them in sentences that they create by themselves. Or if they choose to use this during reading time, they can pick a book of choice to read, and then as they're reading, make sure that they're using the sound cues and correct correlation with whatever punctuation is used in the sentence. And then they can also practice this by either reading aloud or whisper reading to themselves. And so like I said, these are the different materials. Again, I don't have that, but this is something that's very similar to it. And then the different assessments I would use would be, like in the PowerPoint, I showed how there was the check for understanding to make sure the students understood the symbol's name and the sound that they make. Even using them during our guided practice, making sure that the students are understanding which marks go with what type of sentence. And then a summative assessment would be an exit ticket that I would have at the very end, where it would just have a bunch of different sentences on it, and the students would use this individually, and they would go through and circle the correct answer. So, for example, one of the sentences would be, how are you feeling today? And they would circle either the question mark or the exclamation point. And then these apply later in the year. We could use these later during reading and writing, still as a summative assessment to make sure the students still have that understanding, as well as if they're correcting others on their punctuation, which my first graders like to do so much. So that's a possibility. And then some resources that I found were a read aloud of another book called Punctuation Celebration, as well as Punctuation Takes a Vacation. We love the rhyming puns that we have here. And so these are just two good read alouds that you could also use as supplemental text to this lesson. And then some additional resources I found were just activities about the like about punctuation that you could use with your classroom, as well as some other books to use. And then I also included my lesson plan that I had. I'm warning you now if you do decide to look at this, and I'll link my Padlet in the post, but it is overly detailed. The point of this was that my professor was out of town when we were making these lesson plans, so the way that we evaluated these was we gave them to our partner that we were assigned, and the point was that the partner would be able to teach this lesson without needing any other instruction beside it. So it's very overly detailed. So I made sure to just kind of fit what needed to be fit in these different columns for you. But that's a lesson plan if you would like it. I can also put the link of this presentation as well for you. So yep, that's my Think Aloud. So thanks for watching.